Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Chee-Tash. My name is Chris, and today we're going to be going over the book Atomic Habits by James Clear. Today, talking about Chapter 8, How to Make a Habit Irresistible. This is the second section of the book. The first section of the book that we had just finished last time was talking about the first law of habit making, which is making it obvious. This is the cue response. And the second section is going to be delving into the second law, which is making it attractive. So last time we talked about chapter 7, which was the secret to self-control. And the main thing that I got from that chapter was the fact that habits can be broken, but they can never be forgotten. And this is the reason why most people, most heroin addicts, or a lot of heroin addicts, I should say, when they go to rehab and they get out of rehab, they end up relapsing or getting re-addicted because, yes, you have broken the habit, but the context in which you have been doing the habit has not changed. In essence, you have still made it obvious to do that addictive drug because all the cues are still around you. Your environment hasn't changed. So that's the biggest thing I took away from that chapter. We talked about discipline and how disciplined people, yes, they do have willpower. Yes, it is important to have willpower, but willpower drains and it's exhausting to keep it up all the time. So it's better to just put yourself in situations where you don't need to use willpower. And how do you do that? Well, if you have a really bad sweet tooth, well, then just don't keep sweets, don't keep cookies, cakes, or muffins in the house. Maintain your environment and your willpower will come from there. Your discipline will come from there. So that is all about the first law. Make it obvious today. We're going to talk about how to make it irresistible. Make it irresistible. Make it attractive. So, James starts out this chapter talking about supernormal stimuli, and he references a study that was done by Nico Turnbergen, a Dutch scientist in the 1940s, and he was doing some studies with herring gulls. And herring gulls are basically like the seagulls, what I'm guessing that I see everywhere around here in the U.S. But herring gulls have children, have chicks, and when the chicks are hungry, they peck at a spot on their parents' beaks. It's like a little red dot on the parents' beaks. So they peck at the spot whenever they want food. So Nico disrupted this process a little bit by creating cardboard beaks. Not that he disrupted it, but he wanted to emulate it. So he created cardboard beaks with the spot on them. And he thought the chicks aren't going to think twice here. It's a fake beak. It's clearly fake. It's made out of cardboard. They're not even going to pay it any attention. But he presented the cardboard beaks to his study group of herring gull chicks that he collected. And to his surprise, they pecked at them. Even though they weren't real, they're cardboard beaks, but they still pecked at that red dot. And what he found was that when he would make the dot bigger, the chicks would peck faster at the dot. And this response is seen kind of all over the place. He gave an example of, James gave an example of the gray lag goose, which has a similar response with round objects that they think are their eggs. So if they see something that's round, they'll attempt to, no pun intended, round it up and sit on it like it's an egg. And it'll even do this with crazy stuff that's not even remotely the same size as their egg. Like he gave an example, there was a goose that did it with a volleyball and tried to sit on the volleyball like it was its own egg. So this supernormal stimuli is all over the place. So what does that exactly mean? Supernormal stimuli is a heightened version of reality. So it gives, or rather, it maintains, or it gives off a stronger response than usual. It's an exaggerated version of reality. So, how does this help us as far as habits? Well, food scientists know this, and we all know that food is a tricky habit for a lot of people. There's a great book that James doesn't reference, but he kind of gets at it. I'm sure he probably used this book to research for this section, but I read this book a while back. It's called Salt, Sugar, Fat by Michael Moss, and it's all about how these food companies use science to hook us on their food by manipulating salt, sugar, and fat. So these companies know how to heighten your reality, use supernormal stimuli to make you addicted to their food. They do things to increase the oral sensation of food, which is basically the mouth feel, like how food feels in your mouth. They do things to increase the dynamic contrast of your food. And this is more pleasurable than just eating something bland. So dynamic contrast is something like you have a crunchy outside but a chewy, gooey center, maybe like an Oreo cookie, crispy on the outside, but then it's got that soft, thin, cream-filled layer. They try to reach a bliss point, which is when salt, sugar, and fat is at its optimal ratios to each other that makes it, makes a food very addicting. And if you notice any healthy foods or unprocessed foods, there isn't this same manipulation. Think about, I wrote there, think about kale. It's bland. It's super bland. It's not really giving you a lot of dynamic contrast. There's not a lot of oral sensation. There really isn't a bliss point. It's just bland. And it in a way, that's what kind of makes it healthy. You're not going to overdo kale. I mean, you definitely can eat too much kale, don't get me wrong. But you're going to tend not to just eat a ton of kale. You're going to eat a little bit and say, okay, I'm good. I'm good. But this is what the major food companies, this is what they do to get us to eat their products. So they understand this supernormal stimuli. Like I said there, food industries understand how the second law of habit forming works. And what is the second law again? Is to make it attractive. How do they make it attractive? Well, they increase these sensations, this supernormal stimuli. But James points out here that pretty much everything around us at this point in time is exaggerated. All around you, we have exaggerated reality. We have supernormal stimuli. I mean, think about advertisement that shows, the best version of a person, no acne, perfect skin, perfect hair, perfect body weight. You have food which just tastes absolutely so good. It's not too sweet. It's got the right amount of salt. Oh, it's so good. You've got AI now. Think about all the stuff that AI can generate as far as images. Kind of has to do with advertisement, but as far as images, just to make things like seemingly perfect, no imperfections at all in the way it portrays animals or people. So this is all around us. This is all around us. So I wrote there, trends of making rewards. There's a trend now of making rewards more concentrated and stimuli more enticing. That's everywhere. It's, everything's at our fingertips, right? Everything's more quickly accessed. and you have to be more bold or more attention grabbing to grab somebody's attention. It's kind of not an oxymoron, but it goes without saying. You need to stand out just that much more in order to grab people's attention in this day and age. And I like this quote that James has here. We have the brains of our ancestors, but the temptations that they never had to face. And it's hard for us. It's hard for us to get over these things. But there are ways to do it. So you have to recognize these supernormal stimuli, and you have to recognize the work of this dopamine-driven feedback loop. And James has an asterisk in here in this section where he says, dopamine isn't the only game in town. It's not the only thing that drives motivation, but I think just for simplicity's sake, he just used this as like the major example. But it's not just dopamine. He says, that's not the only chemical that influences your habits, but it's one of them. And he talks about it here. So the dopamine-driven feedback loop, this was really kind of unearthed and worked on by James Olds and Peter Miller back in 1954. I don't think they were like the ones who discovered it, but they were the ones who did work on this feedback loop. So they had implanted electrodes in the brain of rats, which blocked dopamine. And whenever the rats were going about their business, the scientists examined and observed that the rats almost didn't want to do anything. They had like lost the will to live. They wouldn't eat. They wouldn't play with each other. They wouldn't have sex. Nothing. It's almost like they lost the will to live. All because they had this blocked dopamine. So there was a follow-up study that was done on these rats that had an implanted electrode where they administered sugar to the rats. And they found that the rats still received pleasure from the sugar. They were still, giddy and excited from getting the sugar. But after that went away, they didn't pursue the sugar anymore. Because again, their dopamine channels and their dopamine feedback loop is blocked by these electrodes. So they chose not to pursue it any further. They went back to just being lost and not motivated at all. So another group came around and did a reversal of this where they gave the rats so much dopamine and they didn't really give it a reward to suffice it. And what they found was that the rats had tons of motivation. They would do some sort of action, like I think they explain in the book, of sticking their nose through this hole. And once they found out that they could do that, and I think they gave them like one reward, one time, and then they just kept on doing it, even though they didn't get the reward from it, but their dopamine was triggering that motivation and that action. So James says here that dopamine is the thing you get after experience. It's not what you get from experiencing. It's what you get in anticipation. It's what you get after experiencing something and after anticipating it. Okay, yes. But it's the anticipation, not the fulfillment, that makes us take the action. So this is the important thing here. It's the anticipation. It's for the same reason how, like a kid on Christmas morning, they get so giddy before Christmas, before even opening the first present. And then, they're excited while opening the gifts, but they were way more excited in the anticipation of that Christmas morning. So James continues on here. The brain allocates more energy for wanting rewards than liking rewards. And every action is driven by the anticipation of the reward. So you can use this to your advantage when making habits attractive, and you can use something called temptation bundling. And this is kind of like habit stacking, what we talked about with the first law of habits, which is, again, making it obvious. It's kind of similar to that. So it's where you link an action you want with an action you need to complete. So you can't do the thing you want until you finish the thing you need to complete. And this was done as an example out in the corporate world when ABC did their Thank God It's Thursday campaign. This was like several years ago in 2014, I think, 2014, 2015. And what ABC did was they linked the action that they wanted with the action that the people needed. Hopefully I'm explaining that right. Hopefully I didn't get that backwards. But they wanted to link relaxing on a Thursday night, hanging out at home, getting comfortable with watching a TV show. And they successfully did that, and they saw, I'm assuming they saw their numbers go up, especially with this TV lineup. You know, they had Grey's Anatomy, Scandal, How to Get Away with Murder. I remember all those shows, I think, were pretty, especially Grey's Anatomy, very successful shows. So they understood how to make this possible. And you can make it possible too. And temptation bundling builds off of the Premack principle, which is the fact that more probable behaviors reinforce less probable behaviors. So again, the thing that you need to complete, you pair it with something that you want to do. So as an example, if you want to look at your phone, but you first need to you need to finish a book, right? But you want to look at your phone. So you can say, okay, so after I read 10 pages of this book, I can look at my phone. Or James has other examples in the book, you know, if you need to express more gratitude in your life, but you want to drink coffee, you say, okay, after I get my morning coffee, I will say one thing I'm grateful for. Something like that. You know, if you need to exercise more, but you want to watch TV, you could say, okay, I will do 10 push-ups while I watch the football game. Something like that. And you're stacking it with an activity that you want to do. So when you do the thing you need to do, you get to do the thing you want to do. Oh, and that's it. Yeah. So hopefully that makes sense. That's temptation bundling. That's making something attractive. Making something attractive, and the way you can do that is through this temptation bundling, kind of like habit stacking. But to summarize, we are going to be going over the second law of habits in this next section, these next several chapters, which is, again, make it attractive. So from this chapter, we learned about how when dopamine rises, so does our motivation. We often get more giddy and excited in anticipation, not in fulfillment. And we use that to our advantage in temptation building, where we can pair an action that we want with an action that we actually need to do. So if you need to get an assignment done, but you really want to play video games, you could say, okay, I'm going to write 4 pages for this assignment, or answer 10 questions from this assignment before I can play half an hour in video games. And that's making it attractive. Guys, thank you very much. That's going to do it for this episode. Thank you very much for listening. Tune in. We've got the podcast going. We'll be back next time with more from Atomic Habits. I know I'm probably getting people who really want me to do another coding video, and I definitely want to very soon. I know I say that every time, but we'll get another one up soon on JavaScript, eloquent JavaScript. But hopefully you guys are enjoying the Atomic Habits book. I know I am. And thank you guys very much for listening. We'll be back next time. My name is Chris. This has been Chee-Tash. Take care, everybody.